Now we're making a wildlife parcel here in Minnesota on our land, and you know, we focus on whitetail so much that if you follow the channel and you're a student of what we do, you'll understand and appreciate and already know that we actually promote all kinds of wildlife on the property here. And I talk about all the time, we have a bullseye right here for whitetails, and when you're managing for whitetails, that probably encompasses the most game species that you can imagine, because whitetails are creatures of diversity and creatures of edge, and they have to have that habitat diversity. For example, you look at a 160-acre parcel that's all hardwoods, and that's all there is. I don't care how high dollar the timber is, it's going to be a very, very poor whitetail parcel, and the potential for whitetail on that property is very limited. You have to spend a lot of money on dozer work, timber harvest, even if there's no appreciable timber value, and then opening up, planting, diversity plantings, and you take something that's 160 acres out of 160 acres hardwood, it's hard to change that and have open fields and habitat diversity that encompasses not only whitetails, but all wildlife. And so when you have a good whitetail parcel, which means lots of habitat changes, lots of diversity, you will encompass a lot of wildlife species. So I'm going to focus on some of that as we move around the property here. And I'll talk about what we're doing to that. For example, we have about 3.1 miles of edge here on this property. I love edge. The reason we have that much is because we have a very irregularly shaped parcel that backs up to ag land over here. So we own the woods. Farmer owns the ag land right there. We're literally standing on the edge right here. And so with that edge creates opportunity. We have a lot of long, narrow pieces of habitat. So what we choose to do, I have literally 3.1 miles of switchgrass planted, 13 to 14 acres. Now, some think, well, that's a monoculture. Folks, don't ever fool yourself, even if some government official or wildlife manager is telling you that you have to have multiple pieces or varieties of grass in a blend to have diversity. That's not true, because you have to have effective diversity. You have to have effective cover. You have to have a plan for everything you do. So if you have grasses mixed in switch around here during the winter, during the fall, those grasses lay down, the switch is the only thing that stands up. So you have to have that switch offering cover. But that's not the only piece of it. You know, we have that 13, 14 acres. I'll show you, this switch right here is only a year old. And it was a year old. We actually mowed it several times. You can see some various weeds in here mixed in. You can see right here behind Dylan, it's a little bit stronger patch. You can see the light color of the switch right here. But you have this switch, you can see how wispy it is right here. And this switch right here was smashed down under a blanket of snow. You can see how frosty this is and crusted that snow is right now. I mean, look at that crust. That was laying on top of that. As soon as it's gone, the switchgrass pops right back up. That's the difference between switch and a lot of grasses. So we use switch on the outside because that, in long strips, offers a lot of diversity of cover next to a diversity of broadleafs, pollinators that actually offer food value for birds, butterflies, bees, pheasants, rabbits, and extending into the woods, even grouse. So you look at in between these areas, all kinds of weeds, flowers, bee balm, cones, milkweed. We have a pollinator blend that is pure broadleaf. We have, say pure broadleaf, we have a little bit of blue stem in because that's what birds like to sit on during the summertime, butterflies, bees. But other than that, it's all broadleaf. We have a couple different types of native clovers that are more prairie clovers, cones, milkweed, black-eyed Susans, lots of different native plants, forbs, forages within that mix. And those pollinators offer a really good diversity, but you don't want to dilute them with grass. So we choose to have solid switchgrass, solid pollinator, but it doesn't stop there. Because we have early successional growth into the woods over here, you can see sumac, a little bit of red cedar. We have an apple tree right here. So we have this edge habitat now extending down into the woods. That's home for escape cover for pheasants. We have nesting habitat out here for pheasants. Then we have rabbits in that intermediate area. They also benefit from the switchgrass. Then we have grouse in the woods. And finally, when you get in the woods, you can see a lot of aspen behind me, but that aspen's only a small percentage because I cut down the rest. We still have a little bit of cutting to do in there. But that aspen, I have that fall out into the brush. So you're creating more brush piles, falls within that sumac. Apple trees, we're falling around the apple trees. Deer can get in and out through the apple trees. And then that's where you have that first edge of regeneration. That's for deer bed. Notice I talked about deer bed last. It's all these pieces coming together to where if we don't have the switchgrass, the pollinators, the switchgrass, the shrubs, the edge habitat, the cover, then we're not going to have whitetails right there. They're going to instead bed about 200 yards down in the hollow, 250 yards before they feel safe and away from this open edge. And then that way we're not maximizing our bedding cover for deer. And so not only are we creating this layer and this first layer of bedding where we can pull does out to the edge and they have everything they need, now we're creating more space in the interior of the woods for bucks. And oh, by the way, when you have all of this early successional growth here mixed with grasses, pollinators, and then you have hardwood regeneration on the edge and shrub cover, what's that equal? It means turkey nesting cover. This year is the first time we've seen turkeys during the wintertime. We actually have a flock of 17 that's been around, 11, 12. So we're finally getting turkeys. This is the first winter out of 3 winters we've actually seen turkeys, and it's a direct result of all this edge habitat. But let's go on a little bit further. I'll show you some other improvements. We'll talk about some rabbit huts in a second because I like rabbits. I don't know if we're ever going to hunt them, but I love rabbits, love squirrels, grouse, pheasants, turkeys, birds, butterflies, bees. What's that all equal? When you have those, they're all indicator species. It equals great whitetail habitat. Let's go on and check out some of our rabbit huts and see how they're doing. Now here we are at one of our 11 rabbit huts that we've installed on the property, and we're going to install some more this year. I don't know what our total number will be when we're done. I don't know if we'll have 25 or 20. I can't see having 50 because you don't need it. We have an abundant rabbit population. But we're making these rabbit populations. One of the things we noticed in our first winter, the end of our first winter, is that we had a lot of rabbits on the property. But as the season progressed, then that rabbit population and the locations we had rabbits began to shrink. As the snow depths increased, we had a lot of snow that year, then the amount of cover that was sustainable for rabbits actually diminished greatly. So what would happen is instead of rabbits being able to go from a brush pile to another brush pile and having some log structure and down timber in between, that down timber was covered up and the rabbits didn't have anywhere to go. So when a predator came in, if they did jump out and leave, try to make it to another brush pile, they're more sitting ducks. So some survived, but we didn't have a high percentage of those survive. So then I looked at like, man, I want to have more rabbits, and rabbits are a true indicator species of good whitetail habitat. So adjacent to our switchgrass plantings, this one's about a half acre. Then we built a rabbit hut over here, and that's kind of the formula we've used on the entire property around all this edge habitat, is to create rabbitat and rabbit huts in locations that would actually complement not only switchgrass, but where we want deer to bed. Because once we get in here and we start hinge cutting and we create a thicker edge here, which we're going to drop some of these trees out into the switchgrass now that the switchgrass is established, and that way that switchgrass come up through trees, either hinge cut or completely cut, it will actually effectively expand this woodlot out and that edge cover that we really want to create with shrubs that will grow in here, and then hardwood regeneration mixed in with the switchgrass edge. So that creates that perfect scenario for not only rabbits, but grouse, pheasant cover, nesting habitat for turkeys. And so right here we have 3 pallets stacked back here. That's always that base, and those are multiple layers so that those young rabbits can get in and go up or down, escape predators. The coyotes can't get in there. It's hard for predators to get in there, especially birds of prey, birds from above. And so then we start hinge cutting all around that, either dropping trees or hinge cutting trees, so that we can actually create that habitat, that overhead habitat, maybe basically like a living bush that the rabbits are living under. And you can see right out here, just by creating these hinge cuts, you have a box elder like this. It's actually throwing shoots up almost right above the rabbitat, right back here. So not only is it coming out of the base here, but it's starting to throw up stems right here, all the way back on top of the rabbit hut, so it can create a living bush and cover. and canopy cover to protect those rabbits. You can see, look at all the regeneration back here on all these stems and all these cuttings. Most of that regeneration is probably about 4 feet tall along this edge within this. It'll turn into a nasty tangled mess, and the only thing we can do to improve on it is make more. I'd like to cut more of this edge down so that we get more sunlight into here. And we have a great brush pile over there that holds deer all year long. So I want to make sure the deer can go back and forth, or the rabbits can go back and forth between that rabbit pile and this created rabbit pile, so that we can protect them throughout the winter. And this is one more piece of the puzzle to where we actually have cover that helps all wildlife species. And oh, by the way, it has a benefit for deer. So let's take a look at some of these other areas out here. We're going to keep driving around the property and show you some more. And I hope you like this and can appreciate this. And again, you know, when you're making hinge cuts, this is more at deer level. This is more the level rabbits want too. They don't want big open canopies, deer or rabbits, that they can go under and predators can get to them from all sides. You want low cover hinge cuts that are more waist high, as opposed to head high. Those are dangerous and foolish, and you don't need to do that for any type of cover unless you're trying to screen something. Then I would suggest either you're on a hillside, you want that height, please practice safety, wear a face shield, helmet. You can get really hurt by doing that. Not something I recommend, but there may be a place for it in some locations, but not in general cutting and practices and for habitat. So let's look at all these pieces come together out here. Again, we have 3 miles of this stuff along this edge habitat, and that's not to mention all the cuttings we have on the inside of the woods. It's like, you know, why go down and make those cuttings on the inside of the woods if we haven't worked on our walls of our fort basically from the inside of the cover? We have a big hollow here that's wooded, a lot of acres down there. If we have this edge up here, which is where we want to hunt these deer and where we want to hold all this wildlife, those deer are going to focus on this edge a lot more. They're going to cruise on this edge. That's where our stand locations are located, and it'll support the deer we have here, and we can actually fit more deer on this property by going down into the interior, more in the way of relocating does closer to the edge and bucks more towards the interior. And really, so what we're doing is we're creating doe habitat first and then bucks down there. And like I said, it supports a lot of other wildlife. So let's check a couple other cool features around the property. And I hope you get the idea that, yeah, it's Whitetail Habitat Solutions, but we're about a huge diversity of wildlife. It's just, I forget it sometimes, because when you're focusing on good whitetail habitat, you're going to encompass a lot of wildlife species. And that's what this diversity and all our work is slanted towards. You can imagine 13, 14 acres of switchgrass we've established over 3 miles in 3 seasons. This will be the 4th season coming up. Pollinator blends, all our cuttings on the interior of the woods. It's been a real chore and a labor of love. And you know, last year my friend Colin that hunts out here, he heard 5 pheasants, 5 roosters, different ones. In the springtime, we've seen 2 just a couple days apart in opposite ends of the property, roosters. Dylan and I had a rooster fly up in front of us. Jen and I had a hen and a rooster together right in our corn outside our house. So we're finally getting some pheasants in the area, and it's a direct result of actually having real pheasant cover, which is standing grass cover that can withstand a lot of winter winds and snow, and then having this edge habitat for escape cover along with it. Let's go on and take a couple more looks at things. Now this is one of the areas I really like. We already had this brushy edge here, and you know, when we first came out here the first winter, we came out to this area, we were all excited because we saw rabbit tracks going in there. They're fresh pellets, and then we found a dead rabbit in there, and we just figured, you know, again, the snow was disappearing, so there just wasn't that much cover. Put in about an acre of switchgrass up here, put a rabbit hut back in here. You can see all these cuttings, and look at all these sprouts that are coming off here now. These sprouts are coming up. It's going to be a very thick tangled mess here, but this is also serving some of our whitetail habitat too. You know, we want the pheasant here, we want these rabbits. Pollinator blend right up there on the other side that we've already prepped for this spring, and more switchgrass on the line all the way to what we call the blade food plot down here. But then this brush pile right here serves as a great blocker along with the switch for one of our newest redneck locations right there. So we put a redneck here, we have this brush pile, the switchgrass for entrance, creates good deer habitat blocking, creates great rabbit habitat, and then also pheasant. And then this is a great spot for turkey nesting, especially right up on this ridge up here where we have the regeneration and grasses where everything meets and all the shrubs that come together. And oh, by the way, we have a 300-gallon water hole right down there. It's one of our newer ones. So that's right in view with this redneck for a bow shot. This corners, we call it buck corner for a reason. We've seen a lot of bucks on this corner. And we can't wait to get a camera back on here this spring and see what bucks are in the area and how they're relating to the water hole. But there's just a lot coming together right here for whitetails and wildlife. And this is a theme all the way around the 3 miles of edge. And then we just so happen down below, not in all these areas, but probably about 250 yards down below and 300 feet in elevation, we have a big bedding area that we've cut down there on the bench system to help support this movement up here on the top. So there's a great spot for critters down there and rabbits. It's along a creek. And that also makes early successional growth. Gives us those grasses that we have down there. We access that only 3 or 4 times a year. It's a really hidey hole for deer that come up here to these ag fields and to our food plots. And again, it all comes together and we're making all this wildlife habitat, might as well put a blind here. So, you know, I tell you about all this wildlife first. Whitetails are the priority of why we bought the property in the first place. We manage 4 whitetails, but boy, you'd have to be blind to not notice how much it helps local wildlife. We enjoy it. It's a real big goal of ours, and we greatly enjoy all the wildlife species on this property, and you can too. I hope some of these features that we're putting here can give you some ideas on your own land of how you can fit it all together for better wildlife and whitetail habitat going into this season. Hey, I'm really excited to introduce to you our Hills and Thermals web class. It's something we worked on all year. We're trying to put lots of facets of scouting, aerial imagery, diagrams on the whiteboard to really teach you how the wind moves through hills and how you should find bedding areas, how it relates to deer movements in general, how that relates to, this is a bedding area stand, this is a food source afternoon stand. We really tried to put this together and offer you a complete picture of how to navigate hills and find better success consistently where you hunt.